Hey, welcome to the Reel It In show. We're in September, racking up our eighth, ninth, something like that episode. I'm Martin, calling from Stockholm, Sweden. I'm here with my fellow travelers.
I'm Dan Sapin in Huntington, New York. I'm a psychotherapist and I don't know, whatever else I happen to be today.
Joe Messina, still up here in Boston.
Cool. Today is exciting because it's also the first time that we have our eminent guest with us. So, who are you here?
I am Adam Shechter. I am super excited to be here. I am a psychotherapist and poet. I have lived for 48 years in New York City, and for the last month, I'm now in Hastings on Hudson. Um, I don't know what it was, a couple of months ago, I was back into a phase of watching comedians getting coffee in cars. I always botch that order, so whatever that combination is of comedians, cars, and coffee. And I'd watch it at night, and I was thinking it would be the coolest thing in the whole world if that they had a show like this with the same comedy and freedom, but for psychoanalysts. And I was living on the Upper West Side at the time, and sometimes you'd see Jerry Seinfeld walking around. So I'd have the occasional fantasy of going up to him and pitching him, saying, "Come on, Jerry, you know you want to do a show with a funny psychoanalytic therapist like me, but you know he's got that kind of Don Corleone strut, so you, you just let him walk by and do his thing." And I'm involved with Mike Eigen, who has a Yahoo group. And on that group, it's a very multifaceted, amazing place. You'll find psychoanalysts and spiritual people and poets and activists and who knows what, having all kinds of soulful psyche talk together. And then you'll have people that will just let everyone know, oh, I published this book, or there's this march going on, or something like that. And Mike shared that Dan had reached out and shared the show, Reel It In. And it was very curious. It was different. It had a totally different tenor and vibe than what you normally hear there. And I was like, wow, what is this? This is sounding, exactly like what I was thinking about. And then simultaneously, I got a connection on Instagram. It was like right at the same time. So I checked it out, and it just felt like a eureka moment, just an explosion. And I made contact, and you guys are, what you say you are, super friendly and playful, but yet, intellectual and deep and thoughtful. And here I am. I'm ready to jump in the sandbox.
I feel
Nice.
understood for the first time. Thank you.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, and welcome, Adam. We're really happy to have you here. I mean, I can say
Yeah.
we got it on our Instagram account where we have maybe 50 followers so far, but we're looking to up this number. We got a message saying when we had published our first episode. I'm going to take it up here because it was. Is it all right if I read this, Adam?
Yeah, please do. Yeah, I'd be
So we
honored.
got this, and it said, "Hello, Reel It In. You guys definitely found a spark. I've never heard the Eigen meeting Beyond story being used as inspiration for just being oneself in conversation. As far as I know, you've taken the story to a whole new level of just talking human to human and expanding the frame to include more of the basic identity of the ego sensing into daily life. I think that's great. That's what Eigen is about, putting a human understandable voice to the psychoanalytic comprehension of everyday existence. You guys are awesome. Looking forward to seeing where you take it. Good wishes to you three, Adam." So we got this, and I mean, I read this, and I was just like, there was something in the language of whoever sent this that just really reached across to me. You know, the especially how you said that putting a psychoanalytic comprehension of everyday existing and including more in how the ego is sensing into daily life. There were just tangents that were hit that, you know, we felt that let's see if we can talk to this guy. So we're super happy that it worked. And today the kind of themes that we've been buzzing around a little bit to see if we can figure something out or decipher relates to kind of psychic spaces and the relation to physical spaces. So there is that kind of interplay between a psychic world and the physical world we inhabit and how they affect each other and what could come out of that. So we have the kind of working title of surfing the tangent, you know, delineating some kind of middle sweet spot where these two spheres interact, collide, cross-pollinate, fertilize, whatever we see of it. So I think that's kind of the theme, and we also have a certain term here, the object-oriented question, that we have heard is a term in modern contemporary psychoanalysis, which actually refers to kind of technique of bringing in the physical space or a dislocation to a certain mental psychic state one can be in. It could be kind of diverged or focus on something else by asking, for example, where's the coffee mug in the car? You know, let's bring it down to some basic concrete levels. So those are kind of the overall themes that we had thought we'd jive around and see if we can make something come out of that. So with that, I think I don't know, Dan, do you want to jump in? Do you have any association on this broad level, or?
Yes, actually.
Yeah.
The first thing I know, we've been exchanging thoughts, text messages, articles to read, with a prominent theme of spaces and places and the way they have a psychic resonance. You know, in one example, the cafeteria and the Isaac Bashevis Singer story, the Stoops of Brooklyn, which I absolutely loved. I have the photos up here for inspiration. What a place and a time evoke in one. And I was just thinking that we were talking about the object-oriented question, which was a phrase and a technique I have no knowledge of, because I guess I haven't taken a clinical seminar in many years. It's time to go back, I think. And the example that was given was for example, a patient having a panic attack. The analyst might ask, well, where were you again? Where was this? How did you get there? Or as you just said, Martin, where is the coffee mug in the car? And both of those examples were about place. But more importantly, they seemed kind of trivial. You know, there's a place, you know, coffee mug, car, or, you know, patient's having a panic attack. Why ask him how he got to Brooklyn? Well, there are technical reasons to do that, but both of those examples were of spaces and places. So on the one hand, the object-oriented question, I mean, Adam, clarify, please, all you wish, but the object-oriented question, I think, is meant to get one out of that affective trap that he might be in, and help open him up or sort of decenter the person just when he needs to be rescued in that way. But it also reminds me of one of Freud's writings about free association, which is, I even wrote this down before, let's see, Freud wrote, this was in the Interpretation of Dreams, I believe, when I instruct a patient to abandon reflection of any kind and to tell me whatever comes into his head, I am relying firmly on the presumption. Can you hear me okay, Adam?
Yes, I do this sometimes just to get in touch with my third ear.
Oh, good.
Is that okay? Is it too, I don't want to, yeah.
Oh, no, please. I just want to make sure my mic was good. I'm relying firmly, when I tell my patient to tell me whatever comes into his head, I'm relying firmly on the presumption that he will not be able to abandon the purposive ideas inherent in the treatment. And I feel justified in inferring that what seem to be the most innocent and arbitrary things which he tells me are in fact always related to his illness. There is another purposive idea of which the patient has no suspicion, one relating to myself. And I'm thinking there, you have both the value of the trivial, which is never trivial, at least in our game, and the examples you both gave were of spaces and places.
Exactly. Yeah, it's amazing how so much of the theory and practice that came after Freud ties back into what he was doing, even though he didn't explicate it in the specific way that the innovator is doing, and that the innovator is saying is innovation from what Freud was doing. Because that you could say that is the object-oriented question, right? Because Freud is the object. So in calling attention away from the patient to himself, he's performing an object-oriented intervention.
This makes me think of you, Joe. Isn't this what the stand-up comedian does, right? Or maybe it's not apt, like the analogy of having people focusing on you when you're telling jokes would, relieve them of their own internal pressures and agonies.
Yeah, I think that is that's definitely how a lot of people think of it, comedy fans and practitioners, I guess.
I love that.
So in that respect, Joe, what came to mind there was that, and Martin, tell me if this dovetails with what you're saying, that since, if you care about Freud and humor, which for Freud, the joke is a particularly good way of sort of detoxifying the painful part of the painful, conflictual part of an idea, of a wish. And we all know that there's no such thing as a joke that has no butt of the joke. Even in the most subtle way, the joke is at somebody's expense. The comic, by focusing on his or her own foibles, miseries, distortions, observations about the weirdness of the world, even if they're roasting someone else, they're doing it with a persona. You can identify with their aggression if you want. Their take, as you said, Martin, the comic is taking the audience out of their own head, out of their own miseries, but letting them identify with this thing that you bring.
He's lending them an object in a way, or she, right? It's like making use of the object. But yeah, I feel we're off. It's cool. I just had two quick thoughts I wanted to throw in there. One was about, when you said this, Dan, it made me think of a masochistic, like the comedian standing there using his own flaws and shortcomings. And it made me think of something I once read about Levinas somewhere. And his approach of taking suffering, as I've understood it. I mean, I'm out of my waters here because I haven't read or digested, the depth of Levinas at all. But what's familiar to me is his very famous view of the other, just by virtue of having a face, you have a intersubjective ethical respect of the other as a sovereign subject, in a way, right? So that's my understanding of one of his. Yeah. So that means that there is a certain pushback, one could say, or inhibition of any own wants, desires, wills, just by virtue of seeing another person. You recognize their inherent subjectivity in that moment. And I read somewhere else about some people having interpreted him as being understood as taking on sufferance as a way to this ethical position that he has reached, in a way. That's what I meant with masochistic. Maybe that's not just, doing him justice. But that was one line of thought, anyhow, of the comedian and Levinas somehow. And the other one was of place and humor. Where does humor come from? I listened to a podcast, the Swedish philosophy show, that I thought was very cool. And they talked about humor as grace, because it emerges. I mean, the kind of humor they talked about was when people sit together and just burst out laughing. You know, you get those 5 minutes in a car with your buddies or your family, and you can't stop yourself. You just laugh, and you laugh at the other people laughing, and it's such a release. And why that release? Because you get out of yourself somehow. You get that temporary or how do you call it, like extraposition, or not finding the right word, but you kind of get a break from being
externalization.
Yeah,
But
you get a break
think of
from being
this,
you. And where does it
the
come
word-
from? Where does it come from?
the word levity.
Yeah.
What do we
Is
mean
that-
by levity? You rise
what does that mean?
above. Well, levity is the word for being, means being lighthearted and funny. That
Okay.
in a way, since humor is always related in some respect to pain or abjection, even, then levity as people say, well, you don't appreciate the gravity of the situation. You're trying to tell somebody, come down to earth. This is heavy. This is nothing to laugh about. But what you're talking about here, and I think the connection with grace is graceful and beautiful, because if humor is about pain in some respect, and the comic offers himself either masochistically or in some martyr-esque, what word am I looking for, way, is allowing the audience, to the beholder, to rise above his own pain, use the comic to identify with a way of getting above that personal, literal, concrete core of suffering. And so in a way, the grace, which is to transcend the misery, to rise above that rocky ground. Is it masochistic? I suppose, well, Joey, you could say better than most what suffering you look forward to when you go on stage. But Levinas,
I'd say that the lifestyle is pretty masochistic for most comedians. But yeah, I mean, I think the as much as this could come across as like a lofty concept, it's like Martin, you were asking where does it come from, and I thought of this documentary I saw, it was several years ago, about laughter. And one of my biggest takeaways from that movie was that babies don't need to be taught to laugh. Like, they never really need to observe that in anyone else in order to do it themselves. So it seems like there is some like pretty deep like biological root of it, and maybe that suggests that all of those moments of levity and coming outside of yourself a bit are some kind of necessary function.
Program.
Yeah.
Adam, where does all this take you?
This took me to so many places. I was just digesting what Joe was saying. The first place that it took me to was when you mentioned masochism, and I started to think about the comedian as the analyst. The object-oriented question, like what we were speaking about before, we mentioned that's a technique developed by Hyman Spotnitz. And he, in some way, worked very similarly to Winnicott when it came to dealing with aggression and hatred. There's Winnicott's famous paper, Hate and the Countertransference, meaning that he saw it as essential to the treatment for the therapist to show the patient that he could survive the aggression that the original environment couldn't, or in some way turn back or rejected. And that technique is so complicated in terms of what it is as far as masochism goes, right? Because you can analogize it so many different ways. So I want to keep the comedian in mind, because I use a lot of humor in my sessions, and I'm thinking now, how is it relating? Because it's definitely another way of dealing with aggression. So one can analogize it. I know you guys talk about Muhammad Ali, but you could analogize it to rope-a-dope, where The patient is going, they have all this aggression, right? Who doesn't build up more aggression than they can deal with in this life? And then it comes out, and the analyst just goes to the corner and then just lets the patient go. And then when they've tired themselves out, put down your mitts and say, oh, so how you doing? Or what do you want to talk about now? Right? Or
My gosh, what a beautiful segue. A couple of things. One, and Joe, please jump in on this. Just first, the boxing analogy, which, as you know, is close to my heart, because I
wasn't
boxing,
intentional there.
I am,
yeah,
and I identify with it. I think I get more out of Customato than I do out of Kernberg, in terms of handling anger. But one of the things Muhammad Ali said in about why he let George Foreman pound away at him for the better part of 7 rounds. I mean, it wasn't just rope-a-dope. Ali did some extraordinarily subtle work in there. It was a piece of art. Even if you don't like boxing, it's worth watching. But Ali said, in context of 3 different heavy punchers he fought, that George Foreman, he had to let George hit him in order to reach the goal, which was to win. He knew he would have to absorb the pain. And as Muhammad Ali, he was capable of absorbing the pain. And talk about countertransference, our ability to absorb the full spectrum of what a patient will bring to a session, not just absorb it, but use it productively. But also, Joe, I'm thinking that aggression, how we if the comic is akin to the analyst, then talk to me about hecklers and how you manage to use their aggression without being overtly aggressive yourself, because it's still part of the show.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think the comedians that handle that best, which I'm not saying whether I'm one of them, but the comedians that handle
The
that
best we've got.
the comedians that handle that stuff the best, I think it's like they're always like bouncing it right back. So it's it I think will sound a little bit like boxing, because instead of being an aggressor in the way that like maybe people were expecting Muhammad Ali to do in that fight, like why aren't you being more offensive and going after Foreman? That's what the comedians that can handle a heckler are, instead of turning into an aggressor themselves, they're a wall that like the aggressor just keeps bouncing back off of, and they're 7 drinks in, so they don't realize they're bloodying themselves up by smashing into this wall. There's a comedian who it's sort of like a punch, like this guy's like a little bit of a punchline in himself in the comedy community, because he's made it his thing to like post videos of him handling hecklers, but he is very good at it. His name is Steve Hofstetter.
I've watched Steve Hofstetter's heckler videos.
Yeah, they go around Facebook a lot and stuff. And there's a reason they got popular. Like he is really good at it, and he just sort of like always has like another line for this person who just seems kind of nuts when like, at least in that moment. And I think that's the kind of the key there. Because I had my moments where I was a younger comedian and sort of just returned to the anger and it doesn't go well. That's not, the audience, for whatever reason, like whatever is happening in the room or in your act, whatever it is, like if you don't have like just the right amount of control, you can lose the crowd's sympathy very fast. So yeah, it's like it's this delicate thing that that people pick up or not over years of doing it.
So can I add something? I was as you were just kind of dissecting what a heckler was, I started to wonder, are there different kinds of hecklers, right? So can there be a heckler who has the intent to destroy, and in which case, right, with patients can't just express any kind of aggression, right? There's a line of when it's sadistic, right? And but what that line is, it will be variable on so many things. So I was wondering, can a heckler, like a patient, be acting out, right? So it's actually called acting in when it's in the session. So can you have a cooperative heckler, right, who is participating in the show in a productive manner? They're giving a hard time to the comedian, but it's part of the show. But then can you have an acting out heckler, who if they were in a group or in a session would say, you can't, should the comedy club owner and say, listen, you can't say that, or should there be some kind of ethical guidelines to heckling?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I do think I think it probably came across, I was like a little careful with my language in describing a heckler, because again, like when I was younger, I would get angry about it. And as I got older, I realized, like, okay, this is a person who just had like however many drinks, and who knows why they did that to begin with, even if it's simply like, well, it's the end of the week and they're stressed out from work, or how often are they getting that drunk? Like it could be anything. So I certainly developed a little more sympathy for however it presents. But so there's definitely, like, there can be sort of like a positive heckler, that certainly exists too. I because we were talking about Jerry Seinfeld, I thought of this. There's in one of his HBO specials, I'm telling you for the last time, which was the one he did after Seinfeld ended. At one point, someone in the crowd yells out, like, "Jerry, I love you." And that's, technically that's a disruption. It's a little bit of a violation. Like, you don't know Jerry Seinfeld. That's a weird thing to say to him, actually. But Jerry Seinfeld said something like, I love you too, but I do feel the need to see other people, or it's a very, very Seinfeld line. And that's something where that person, like, again, there could be a million different things happening in their life, and it could be that they just wanted, like, to get some reaction back from the world, from the universe, and that that took the form of Jerry Seinfeld at that moment. And so they went for it. And it's almost like dealing with a kid, honestly, is the analogy that just came to me. Because, like, I think kids a lot of the time just want, like, an acknowledgement. And in years of working with kids at this point, I have come to have a little more patience with them too, and realize that, like, if they're yelling out, or I'm a music teacher, so if they're, like, playing out of turn, and I'm trying to talk and whatever, like, the giving them some kind of acknowledgement, or like making a little joke back at them or something, is a lot more effective than yelling at them, or just, like, trying to discipline in that moment. A lot of the time it's just sort of like, okay, yeah, I see you, it's all good, like, then move on, and they're kind of better. So yeah, I hope that answers it.
Beautiful answer, Joe. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dan, do you want to go, or should I go?
Oh, Martin.
All right. Well, this is super interesting. Like, I was going somewhere, but then you said this about acknowledgement, and that brought me back to kind of Levinas. And I don't know. I think that acknowledgement is super important in many respects. But what I was thinking of as you guys were talking about this, I started thinking about place. So it strikes me that both the psychoanalytic office, as we are kind of accustomed to the stereotypical image of the couch and the chair behind the couch, as well as the comedian's kind of scene, right? There's a scene and then the audience sitting down. Because when you were talking about hecklers, what rose to my mind was the Capitol Hill storming people. You know, hecklers that go out of line, hecklers that are in fact sadistic and you know, yeah, not in any kind of frame whatsoever. They're out of bounds. So because I was starting thinking about that height of Capitol Hill and then running up there, and then the kind of scene of the comedian versus the audience, the couch and the analyst. And you know, I got into this kind of binary thinking, and I was thinking of, because we've been playing around with it with an atelier, you know, like this Donald Meltzerian concept of conducting an analytic work in a completely different way. So I guess my question, or just throwing it out there, how space could potentially impact these relations that you guys are describing in terms of countertransference, violence, hate, and so on. And if there are ways to kind of think around that, or mediate it, or, you know, play with it somehow in the physical aspect of it. How would one do stand-up comedy in a different setting? Are there alternatives where people sit around in circles, or I don't know what it would be, where it's not that kind of, you know, you get me where I'm driving, or is it?
Yeah.
Dan, you look puzzled.
No, it's not puzzlement. It's fascination, and it's kaleidoscoping in my head.
That's where I was at least. How does space relate to these kind of conflicts we're talking about, and if so, how?
I think about Beyond's alpha function. Remember when the Capitol was stormed, I thought that it was an alpha function enactment. Meaning, for people who don't know, alpha function is Beyond's construct that when the baby is flooded with what's called beta elements, or just impulses and just the chaos of their instincts, the mother is able to contain it and receive it and somehow metabolize it down. And I saw the Capitol Hill building as a kind of like a negative womb, or this desire on all these grown-up babies that had never been held, never been coddled, never had these primitive aggressive needs taken care of, and they're just running rampant in a destructive way. And I think to Joe's drunk heckler, like what you ask patients if they have a substance problem, perhaps to come to a session without drinking 24 hours beforehand, because what drinking can do is it can render someone unresponsive. So even though someone is present, right, or going back to Levinas's face, right, if you can't see someone else's face, the baby and the mother, right, if the mother is in some kind of state and she can't see the baby's face, she can't return the gaze, how can she perform alpha function? Yeah. How can the drunk heckler resonate if they're just, you know, lost in alcohol? So so then maybe going with your question, how does a space either become therapeutic regardless of where it is, or how does it become and because I guess in that case, anywhere could be therapeutic in any moment, or any place, including the analyst's office, can become destructive if there's not responsivity.
Well, think of the configuration of things, which is not always so determinative, but the convention, the custom, which, you know, is sort of by default now, except in certain theaters, you have the performer, in this case the comic, standing on a stage, well lit, and then the audience is in front of him, and all the focus in this almost linear way is between the performer on display and the audience in the dark, relating in their own way. And then you have people acting in who bring some kind of aggression, some inability to contain their own beta elements, you know, their own inner noise. And so in that moment, whether it's assisted by alcohol or whatever other factor, that aggression and that need to be acknowledged, which we can get into the way in which a baby, in Klein's work, the superego develops, rather than in year 3 or 4 through the Oedipus complex. Namely, I realize I can't have my mother the way I want her, and I can't kill dad. So I'll feel guilty for how I think, and I'm going to emulate dad as best I can. And instead, Klein basically says, from the moment the infant is able to bite the mother's nipple, as the quintessential example, it's sort of I bite mommy's tit, therefore I am, and but that's also the moment that I start to feel guilt, shame, and the fear that I'm going to be abandoned because, whoa, she either drops me, or bad baby, or ouch, it's bottled for you. And how the mother handles her own pain from the infant's innocent aggression determines a huge amount about how that person is going to grow up with respect to the other. So you bring in Levinas, and I think what a magnificently wide-ranging set of references here. We have Emmanuel Levinas, whose best known work is Totality and Infinity, some of the most difficult to read philosophy of all the difficult philosophy out there. But Levinas is in a wonderful tradition of Jewish philosophers, among them Levinas, and a much more straightforward to read Martin Buber, who put us, and you mentioned as well, by bringing in Hasidic philosophy before Adam, that the divine can be found anywhere. It can be found in the speck of dust you just managed to avoid stepping on. It's in that sip of tea, or more importantly, specifically with Martin Buber, in I and Thou and Between Man and Man, his two most notable works. The divine is to be found in the unalloyed, uncorrupted, mutual gaze, the ability to regard another person as someone who is not less than you, who is not instrumental, who is not representative of a class or a category, who is not an obstacle, the ability to see the other as a full being. That is where God emerges. But whether you come at it from a theological angle or not, it relates directly to the gaze, the ability of the other, the mother, the comic, the analyst, to be able to absorb what the other has to give. But more to the point here, since you bring up January 6th and the uprising at the Capitol, well, what do you have? Who was the main target of aggression? Who was the most despised of all the governmental folk? Hint, female.
Pelosi? No? I mean, you guys
Yes.
are the Americans. You know this better than
You know more of our shit than we do, Martin. Come on. You know New York City law better than I do at this point. But certainly it wasn't just her, but Nancy Pelosi, the intolerant mother, the mother on whom everything evil was projected. I mean, anything Democratic, any Republican who didn't toe the imaginary Trumpian line was also a target. They wanted to kill Mike Pence. But Nancy Pelosi was the bad breast. And if you had to interview people, who do you hope to stomp on today? If you could pick one person, guarantee you it was Pelosi. And infiltrating her office, taking her stuff. One of the big pieces of Donald Meltzer's work and Beyond's with respect to the breast and the desire to know the insides of the mother. People wanted to get in and destroy her from the inside out, but more importantly, think about the role of the face and the way in which that ethical mandate was turned inside out there. Number one, you have a Republican conservative let me say it's associated with the people, not with the philosophy, that this is today's particular psychic corruption on the red end of things, that you have women from cultures where their faces are hidden are particularly targeted for hostility and aggression. You have in the uprising itself, the desire to bust into the sanctum, to bust into the parental world of authority, the capital, and tear it apart. And people wanted to take stuff. They wanted trophies. This was, and you before, Adam, had mentioned, and somebody rescue me if you need to, when you talked before about what was the reference you made between the capital intruders? Yeah, there was the capital intruders and the hecklers.
The non-responsive heckler who's the drunken heckler who's not actually
Yes.
physically present because they're numbed by the alcohol.
Yeah, that these folks, and you can lump them in with QAnon followers, conspiracy theorists, in my opinion, anti-vaxxers, for the most part, that these are people, many of whom are educated, above average in income, on the face of it, as capable of critical reasoning and self-control, on the face of it, as any of us. And yet somehow the need to think that there is something diseased and corrupt at the heart of the parental complex. Mommy and daddy are phonies, they're fakes, they're bad, and they must be destroyed. This is a Kleinian nightmare in action, to the point at which everything reasonable disappears. You have intelligent, you would think, are people capable of avoiding this, believing in the Satan worshiping pedophile ring out of the pizza parlor. They believe it in spite of everything else that's been made available to them as human beings. Why? One reason being that this psychological crap is real, and that when the aggression and the feeling, for want of, in a way you could say that the way in which the bad dad sort of fomented this rage, and people just like, you could say with the emulate dad, can't kill him, he's too powerful. Besides, it must be fun to be Trump and hate everyone and really have no care. It is an abdication of responsibility to others, which is really delightful. There's so much pressure that takes off. That, when he disowns it, or people say, no, this wasn't Trump's doing. Bullshit. People emulated dad. Only dad did this entirely for the purpose of the attention, the political opportunism, the power fantasy. People say all over that Trump has nothing but contempt for his own people, and yet people ignore the signs of that and allow themselves to be wound up to the point of invading the capital of the United States of America, feeling entirely justified to do so, but based entirely also upon delusional lies about what was happening in the government. There's plenty to hate the government for if you want to. Mm-hmm. But that intrusion of the inner sanctum, that angry, beyond heckling, this was murderous.
And it's still there. It's
yeah.
Right.
And the capital as place.
That's
what does it represent?
Yeah. I wanted to add to that because I think the other biggest sort of object of their derision in the Democratic Party is AOC, who is like a, in my opinion, much better Democrat than Pelosi, but also this, like, the younger end, like, pretty significantly, they're pretty far apart in age. but you know, to these people, they're the same. Honestly, to a lot of like morons on my side are, you know, that they look at them and they're like, they're the same. And because AOC won't lead a socialist revolution, she's terrible. And it's like, well, there's a lot of people not leading a socialist revolution. I wonder why you're so focused on her. And there's sort of this like, and this I think is present on the left, but especially on the right, this sort of like like sexual violence inherent in the criticisms, that there's just something about it, and it's not always like explicitly stated, but you know, like I saw AOC talking in an interview about like, yeah, I was afraid I was going to die that day. I was afraid I was going to be raped that day. Like that's what these people say in their secret like Reddit chats and whatever. Like they say these things openly. And there's some attitude that's like in the way they talk about people like AOC, people like Pelosi, that it's like, yeah, I think there's like a lot more here than I have grievances with the government. And what also speaks to that is that this is such a misplaced anger and misplaced like political program to say, I hate Pelosi, therefore Trump. That's like, I don't see the connection. There's no line to be drawn here. You're just saying, I want this guy to rule over me in this shitty oppressive system instead of this lady. And it's you know, not that they're the same, but like it's a misplaced anger and a misguided attempt to sort of come up with a description and then a prescription for like what is wrong, you know.
I'm gonna reach for my cup of coffee, or orient myself towards the object.
Cheers.
So
the breast is empty.
fill it up.
Here.
Dude, that was the funniest.
Thank you.
The Cartesian. I bite the nipple, therefore I am. I've never heard that.
I
There's
love
so
that.
many-
That's
yeah,
gotta write
there's-
that one down.
Titty.
man.
The word was titty.
Yeah,
More
And I mean-
impactful.
yeah, it was great. But Adam, what are your thoughts on this? I feel that, you know, we're speaking for lengthy periods of time here about these things. Where do you?
Yeah,
dive
the last point that Joe is making that caught me was when I think about politics and where there's a number of languages that I've never felt comfortable speaking, that I myself feel a distance from. Politics is one, sports is another, foreign language is another. There's a few. So when I speak about politics, I feel as though I'm a foreigner. It's not a language that comes to me naturally. So the idea of I know politics is real. Sports games are real. When I earlier today, we moved to this town. Right, we've been in New York, which is such a complex place. You can't say it's anything one way or the other. The town we moved to now, it's very sports oriented. It's known to be like a green political town, but I didn't realize it's a very sports oriented town. So I've been thinking about sports a lot, looking on Instagram. I have friends there at the Jets game right now that I grew up with. I never went to a Jets game with them. You know, we played two-hand touch on the street together. I'd play stoop. I had my version of sports. I lifted weights. I do a pickup game. I was never got too formal about it. When I watch a football game, when I watch the Super Bowl, to me, it's almost like going to the opera. right? It's like this cultural foreign thing. Like I appreciate it and like I'm looking at it and I'm understanding it in the terminology. Fourth down might as well be, the term, however they're using Italian vibrato, or they're just ideas that I start to sense. So when I hear politics being talked about, and I think, Joe, what I'm hearing you say is that there's this play of binaries. I think somewhere in the psychotic or core, Michael Eigen writes about there's the know-it-alls and there's the know-nots, right? So if you tell someone you know something and they don't, you're the know-it-all and they're the know-nothing. Then the know-nothing says, no, you're the know-nothing, I'm the know. So you get this kind of like centripetal force that is just gonna probably spin, and it's gonna explode, or it doesn't resolve. So the problem I see with politics, and that I see in many situations when people are trying to resolve a conflict, is that they're trying to do it from the top down rather than from the bottom up. So meaning,
what's the bottom here?
The bottom up is just saying, I'm a human being. This is what I am, right? This is the stuff that's going on with me. And what I love about psychoanalysis, and why I see it as a form of activism or of some kind of mystical position, is the role of deferment, where it's saying like, hey, I don't know if I'm right, I don't know if I'm wrong, but let's just do this. Let's just talk about it, right? Like if an enactment happens with a patient and they're angry, saying, okay, this may have happened, who knows, but let's just meet next week again and keep talking about it. Let's put off any final action. So to me, that's where the bottom is, where people will come and say, hey, I'm coming from this place. This is where I'm from in Louisiana, and this is where I'm from in Brooklyn. I just, came over here from the Middle East, and I just came here from South America. I just came here from Poland or England or wherever it is, and just saying this is what's going on, and not assigning any final judgment to it, not saying this is right or wrong, but creating a therapeutic space by not doing anything but talking about it, and then seeing what can build.
Beautiful.
Think of how that is a balm as well as an offense to some people. You have the trope of, even from boxing, Mills Lane, the referee, let's get it on. Enough time for talk. Talk is over. Time for action. Just do it.
Right.
Which in context is fine. But something most of the world doesn't get and doesn't want yet, they don't know what it is the value of not acting. And by that, I do not mean passivity. I mean not foreclosing on something you do not understand or have a handle on. And when we look at the Capitol, and by all means, somebody grab this and run with it if you want, something special, something very rare, special in a bad sense, happened that enabled people to say, not only do we protest, not only are we going to get up in the hearing and yell and not let the talk happen, we're going to bust in and hopefully I'll get to kill some congressmen today. And these are people who may have never killed anyone or anything in their life. They may have fantasized. Something took all ethical constraints, all attempts at deferment, at understanding off the table, and made it not only possible, but necessary to go in and murder, to go into the sanctum, the womb of America, you could say, and destroy those in charge of it. There were no people there. There was no one to talk to. There were nothing but enemies. How did it get to that point?
Yeah. So, couple of thoughts. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's something we said for this, especially, I think wasn't sure entirely what you, Adam, or Dan were referring to at first, but when you put it in terms of like, Dan, I think you said about the insurrection attempt, and Adam, I think you I don't know if you said something about the like vaccine hesitancy, but something one of you said made me think of that, and
I was speaking in the generality of that attitude,
right, yeah,
opposed to the liberal attitude and how they lock each other in a never-ending finger pointing battle.
right, yeah. The conclusion, like the coming to the conclusions, and not being able to not act and say, well, I don't know yet, let's figure it out. And there's this sort of like twisted version of that where people they say these things like, do your own research and this and that. Is like, well, a lot of people who know a lot more than us have done their own research, and
People
we
who know
can
how to
go
do
and
research.
look at all the things they wrote right now. We can go read all of it. Like, it's right there. It's on the internet. And then we are informed, and then there's no real excuse to go with other information that doesn't make any sense. So yeah, in that sense, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said here for that that sort of concept we were just talking about. I do think there's a little bit of a like misconception, and this is maybe a very Western thing, certainly a very American thing, where I think we have this idea that politics works best when like well-intentioned people get in the room and hash it out. And I think that's a little bit of a misconception, because first of all, I think a lot of the time when they get together and hash things out and they come to a bipartisan understanding, that's actually really bad for a lot of us. It's really bad for a lot of the world when they agree. But yeah, so like, well, so like in I think of it this way, like when this insurrection attempt happened, immediately when they got back to the floor, Matt Gaetz and Josh, whatever their names are, these idiots, yeah, we're going, I actually have heard some compelling evidence that it was Antifa, and no, we shouldn't do anything. They're patriots and whatever, it was like immediately they're like very upfront telling you, we are not on your side. We want you to die by the hands of these people who did this. And then, what we see from, from the ones that in there that I like better, like AOC and Cori Bush and Ilhan Omar, they started drafting resolutions right away to say to Pelosi, don't seat these Congress people who were tweeting out Pelosi's location during the insurrection, who were defending these people right after it happened. Like, don't do that. Like, just don't let them be here. You have that power. Prosecute Trump for insurrection and then the sort of Democratic establishment, I think, again, appealing to this American sort of ideal of, well, we are the reasonable ones and whatever, and we want to seek bipartisanship and help the Republican Party get back to its more positive roots or whatever. And it's like, okay, Lincoln did some good stuff, but like there's not a lot of good to be had there. And I think when a party is too focused, the way the Democrats are, Biden talks like this a lot too, on being agreeable and saying, but oh no, we're reasonable, civilized people, and we're going to talk it out. And well, that opens it up for a Republican Party or a National Socialist Party to come in and push their stuff through. I mean, politics is it is a fight, you know, like it's sort of what we came up with when
Right. Yeah.
like what if at least us here in this area don't go to war with each other, we'll have this thing instead, we'll meet and try to like come up with stuff to do. But it's like, well, yeah, but like it very much the way sports, boxing, all of this stuff is like a one thing versus the other. Politics is too, and it took the place
Yes.
of war in a lot of ways. And
Yep.
it's a little bit naive for people to think that it's just about getting back to this more reasonable place that never really
Yep.
existed.
Joe, just that's something that's an interesting approach of getting to a reasonable place, which it makes sense that that's one strand of thinking. But I feel it's important to clarify that that I am on the left, and in the reality of the sports game of politics, I am on the left, and everyone I surround, not even intentionally, that's just the culture. I was born into that culture. If I have a way of defining myself, I could say I have a socialist heart.
Yeah.
Like if you look at the way I've worked in clinics, I've just been an activist by nature. If you look at how I handle fees, just how I live, it's just how I naturally am. But I have a psychoanalytic psyche. I just have this kind of natural analyzing psyche. So for me, it's almost like a double vision, where it's like I have an identification. Everyone I know goes to marches. I went to one march in my whole life, and I've never been to a concert at Madison Square Gardens. I saw the largest concert I went to see the Bangles, because my friend's older sister couldn't use her tickets when we were 12 years old. And I got to sit in the Beacon Theater and cheer Walk Like an Egyptian. That was the biggest. Other than that, I've just been in little jazz clubs and little I went to Southpaw. I guess that's a pretty big place. But
I certainly didn't get the sense that you were sort of like enlightened centrist or something like that. Yeah. So I didn't mean that as an accusation.
Well,
no, I don't even mind it. I just want to say one last thing, just to tie it around to where this started, because it's a very tricky thing, right? It's a very tricky, in Judaism, they have this mystical idea of the Lamed Vavnik, right? That there's 18 people that hold up the world just by being and doing nothing, right? Or this kind of Buddhist idea that by being and doing nothing, you're doing good. So there's this kind of psychoanalytic idea of just holding these ideas, and that somehow in this kind of like quantum way, in this kind of big bang way, that just by holding the idea internally and talking to other people, that somehow psychic spaces are being made. But it's really a system within systems. It's not.
But let me jump in there,
Please,
because I really loved what you said when you recounted your story there, Adam, about, let's talk about it as a kind of, recurring. All right, I don't know if that happened or whatever happened. Let's talk about it. You made that.
That happens every day.
And I thought that was beautifully put. And what I wanted to kind of anchor there is the role of trying to understand, study, work with, theorize the experiencing subject.
Yes.
The experiencing I, if you will. I mean, we have so many versions of science and knowledge and great tools and empiricism of understanding from the outside, from an objective third person perspective, what it feels like to have what it looks like to have a broken leg. We can see it in the scans, in the MR. We can analyze the brain lesions that patients have had, or we can understand socioeconomic data and stats in terms of what people vote for what candidate and so on. But when we flip it to the side that you're talking about, Adam, we get a sense of what it feels like to be that I that does certain things, whether they be destructive or constructive or a little bit of both. And I think that's a very, very important perspective to keep working with. And I think psychoanalysis has done one of the greatest that I've, at least the one I dig. I'm not a very religious person, in a more scholastic, or what do you call it, like a doctrine kind of perspective. But I think psychoanalysis and phenomenolo I can't say that word.
All the words impossible.
Yeah.
Phenomenological.
Yeah, that word.
Blah, blah.
Yeah, and I think it's an important perspective, and I mean that also in a larger kind of, let's say, political sense, even though I use the word a little bit differently there, but in a global sense of trying to work with societies and people, that branch of trying to work with the experiencing I is very important. And another thing I wanted to say, I mean, we're soon to close today, so we might not have that much time, but I still want to throw it in there, because when Dan was speaking about the insurrection and the people storming this Capitol, and the gays, you guys, we started with a drunken heckler. So my idea was straight the eyes. You can't connect visually with that person because he or she is dim. They're drunk, they're off their head. You can't reach them, right? So Levinas and the face of the other, to me, it has the gaze that Dan was pointing out to, and that leads me to Lacan and the kind of role of the imaginary as opposed to discourse, language, the symbolic, right? So there is that history of psychoanalysis. What kind of patients can you work with in analysis, and which patients can you not work with? And I think it's important to think around those things. What maybe for some people the gaze is instrumental. If that kind of lack of containment that Adam described, toddlers never having been held, or never been mentalized. The mother has, or the father has not been able to contain any of their debris for whatever reason. Maybe that in those cases, maybe a dyadic kind of imaginary gaze process is critical. Whereas for people where language is accessible, the symbolic is real. They can anchor their thoughts in language and principles and historical narratives that other people understand and also orient themselves around. Then maybe the talking cure in a more classical sense works better. So this brought me back a little bit to this about place and the atelier function. We never really picked that thread up, but like, how is it possible or not to kind of continue to diversify, in lack of a better word, potential spaces for meeting people? Maybe the scene of the comedian and the crowd in the dark that just projects unilaterally everything onto this one image. Maybe there are more modern ways to think around that. The couch could be there. They could also be a chair. They could also be a chessboard. Before we started recording, Dan told a beautiful story about how you sat down with a professor and teacher that you liked, and he had books piled everywhere. And, there was like these kind of environmental props that just made it feel very differently than in another kind of conversation. So that's something that I wanted to bring in here, that how to find more meeting places, whether they be analytically oriented in a treatment, or we talking about political debates or political rallies. Maybe in certain contexts, talk to talk works. Maybe in certain contexts, the imaginary is important. Just think of the role of the media flooding people with images and images and images and images.
Yeah.
There's no room, no space to digest language and think about it.
Yeah.
Beyond language, Martin.
Yeah.
Beyond language without eyes. The
Yeah.
atelier enables everyone to look everyone else in the
Beautiful.
eye, whereas the discourse without the gaze is going to corrupt itself. And my own quick example was when I started taking part in these online forums around 2000, when I got high-speed internet. I noticed that a great many of the older famous psychoanalysts behaved abysmally reading into each other's words, getting into blood feuds over simple grammatical misunderstandings.
Sounds like Twitter.
And it brings to mind as well, for late in this talk, one of the inherent problems with the couch.
Yeah,
On
that's
one
what I was
hand,
driving for. Yeah.
You facilitate primary process. On the other hand, by facilitating transference as well, you take away the function of the face and the ethical imperative in psychoanalysis. And that was a fundamental technical difference between Freud and Jung, for example, that Jungian analysis, as deep as it gets, which is often Jungian analysis, is classical analysis. And Jung himself said so. But they don't use the couch. People meet eye to eye as equals.
This is cool.
Yeah.
It's interesting. My last association that I wanted to throw in there in all of these was on the role of the deferment and the not reaching a conclusion or foreclosing a certain possibility, which I think is also very important things that you said there, Adam. And that brings me to a place where we usually go on this show, which is, the negative capability or the O, by being O, that like that possibility of withstanding the desire to pack up and wrap up and, seal the deal with the category etiquette and put it in a shelf. Like, I think that's a theme we usually come back to, and it popped up for me there as well. Like, what is it that makes it possible to defer? Well, isn't it, that kind of negative, tolerating, not knowing, grasping after irritable facts or reason, or how?
I love that line. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, so I wanted to add to what you were saying, Martin, about the different ways to present stand-up, and that would like relate to this sort of psychological meeting eye to eye and that kind of thing. Because I think the maybe there are more imaginative ways to do this, but I think just the size of the venue in itself has a big impact on stand-up, at least. And
it's commercial reasons then, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot is actually lost when people do stand up in a theater, especially, you get to the level of like these huge theaters and stadiums and stuff. And it's like, that's cool. Like those are fun to watch sometimes, but I think there is something inherent in stand up that is served best in a small club or a very small theater. When I was actually at the height of doing stand-up in Philly, I did, I was finally passed at Helium Comedy Club, which is, I think, like the perfect size. And, an even smaller place can be cool too, but this, 200 seats, maybe it is. It's like, it's just a really perfect setup. Everything's just like, all the seats are kind of like, flayed out like this, pointed towards the stage. And yeah, there's a huge difference between that and, a theater, or even like a restaurant show where like there's just too much space between you and the crowd. So I think there is a lot of overlap there.
The word I think it captures what you said was intimacy, which, by the way, dates back to, there's two meanings in the Latin etymology, which is to make an impression, and the other is to make family.
And this relates to, I was on a similar line, because when Joe talked about the baby that doesn't need to be taught how to laugh, I juxtaposed that with something I've read in more evolutionary psychology, or whatever to call it, the groups, I don't know if this is actually true, but it's something I've picked up, that around 150 people is the kind of size of the group that is manageable. It's like divides naturally in subgroups and they can interact with each other. After that threshold, we need to start building, superstructures to organize that structure. So so I put it together, that kind of laughter, intimacy, like Dan mentioned, and maybe certain size of people. And how is that for how we're living in these, mega cities of just millions and millions of people? And, you know, where do we find that moment to connect and orient ourselves towards the coffee, the car, the diner, the stoop, sit down, have a conversation with each other. I mean, yeah, that's kind of where I ended up. Where are you guys, Adam? Where are you at?
Well, yeah, I'm thinking about Eigen's distinction union, right? How there's all different constellations of being together and being apart. If I could bring it full circle, I don't know if surfing the tangent was still a theme, but what occurred to me in these little notes that I took was that a tangent starts in one place and it goes to another place, and the sense is that it's on an indefinable ocean, right? Or the unconscious, or the mycelium, right? The fungal network of
Rhizome.
the roots, and that we're always starting at one place and going to another. And when we do that, we're connecting in all kinds of ways to different groups of different sizes, to different parts of ourselves. And a thought that I had that went along with that was that in notes before the session, Dan was talking about the unit of the spiral. And I never really thought about the spiral. And I was thinking, what does the spiral do for me? And maybe it symbolizes how when I surf a tangent, right, when I go along a shape in a space of infinity, it creates a moment of finitude. It makes distinct that I've gone to a point in myself with another object, and I've left another part of myself that I don't know where I am, and then I spiral back, and then I've come back to that other point. And that what am I in all of this? I'm a surfer. How can I organize the experience of life, especially in the pandemic, right? As all these cultural connections to stoop and diner and comfortable social organization are constantly questioned, I'm left with this feeling that it's my psyche that I'm with, and that everyone also is very isolated. We all have these psyches, and we come together, and then we go apart again, and we come together, and there's this like very intense loneliness that's come to the surface. But as Eigen writes about it, that in the word alone, there's also all one. So there's this kind of spiritual dimension that even though we can't resolve any of this, that there is some kind of mystical nourishment in it that is just, it's quite a mystery.
And to heal the breach as well, to atone, is to at one.
At one, exactly. Yeah.
To become whole again.
Right. Yes.
That's
I'm thinking,
I was thinking that you guys are circling it in. I was gonna say I see the face of you guys in terms of the role of the face, and I feel connected. It feels like we have done some kind of shape together, and we're landing back in somehow. That's my sense.
I love that, Barton. Yes, I see some very beautiful faces. I don't know how, but as you, right before you said that, I looked at Dan's face, and it never looked realer than in all the moments we were talking. So yeah, you just tapped into something. It's incredible.
I'd like to invite you all to sit on my front stoop.
I'm definitely down.
I'm there.
With the drink of your choice.
Okay.
You know, bring my dog. You know, we never got to talk about the stoop, but of this wonderful home, the front of our home, a step where we can all just gather, you know, symbolically or otherwise. That's a place where it's very hard to be at odds.
And that's where we can come and go, right? Distinction union.
Oh yeah, love it.
Yeah.
Where we gather and where we come and go. Beautiful.
Cool. Joe, do you where are you?
I mean, I don't know if I could put it better than we already have. I think that was that we got to where we were trying to go.
All right.
Yeah,
So we call it a wrap.
All right,
I think that's a good
Beautiful.
stopping point. Yeah.
let's
Wrap
call
it
it.
up, Martin.
Okay,
All right.
wrap it.
All right. Nice
Thanks for
talking to you
coming on,
guys.
Adam.
Yeah, it's such an
Good to
honor
see
to
you,
be here
Adam.
and talk to you guys. Thank you. I'm sorry, what?
Said good to meet you. I hope you come back.
Likewise. All right, I'll be back.
Cool.
Okay. All right.
Definitely.
See you
All
next
right.
Sunday, all.
Have a good evening, guys.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye.
Okay.
Reel it in, guys.